One of the things that I forget often as I continue to grow and gain experience and learn new techniques and things is that one of the most basic parts of making a bowl is figuring out how to get this onto this. Here's a few methods. To my knowledge, every lathe that you buy brand new comes with a faceplate. This is a little iron faceplate. There's a stainless steel faceplate. They come, this one takes 5, 6, 7 screws, 6 screws, 12 screws, and they come in different sizes. They all have one thing in common, that is a thread that fits and matches the headstock of your lathe. Make sure if your lathe is 1 in 8 TPI on the headstock, meaning 1 inch 8 threads per inch, and 1 inch in diameter. Make sure that if you order a faceplate, if it didn't come with one, that you get one that matches. Also, do not use deck screws or sheetrock screws to hold these on. Get good, solid, strong wood screws. Sheetrock screws especially will shear, and you'll end up with a chisel and a hammer digging the ends of screws out of your block of wood that you're trying to turn into a bowl. Another method is some form of a screw chuck. These are usually shop made. This one I made specifically to hold bottle stoppers, and then I ended up getting a mandrel with the same size and same TPI screw. But this would be maybe bolted onto a faceplate, and then you have some kind of a screw that comes out, and your bowl blank would sit on the surface of the wooden disc, and the screw would help hold that pressure against there. Now this one is made to be held by a chuck. Most common method of holding a wooden piece on the lathe is a 4-jaw chuck or a scroll chuck. This is a Nova G3 anniversary edition, 30th anniversary edition, old style. And the difference between the old style and the new style is the old style was sold originally as an expansion jaw chuck, meaning when you tighten it, the jaws open. So in compression mode, where it's closing down, you would unscrew it. The new style is the exact same chuck, except you turn lefty-loosey, meaning as you turn left it expands, and righty-tighty, meaning as you turn right it contracts. The other difference is on the 60 millimeter jaws here, on the old style, there's a little tooth in the at the top of the chuck that can cause problems in cross-grain tenons. It can cause those to split. The new style doesn't have that. Some chucks have dovetails. These are dovetail chucks, meaning that it's narrower at the bottom and wider at the base, and you put a dovetail either in a recess to expand into or on a tenon to contract onto. Most chucks, as far as I know, come with a woodworm screw, which effectively turns that chuck into a screw chuck. For the Novas, if I drill a hole 5/16 in the center of this little blank, I then screw it that's smaller than the threads. See those big, deep, heavy threads there? That's smaller than those threads. I would screw that on, and those threads would pull the face of the bowl down onto the jaws, or onto the shoulder of the chuck jaws. And that friction between the face of the piece of wood and the shoulder of the chuck jaws holds that piece of wood so that you can create a bowl. When you turn a bowl on a woodworm screw, you want to put the screw in what's going to be the inside of the bowl, and on the other side you want to put one of two methods of attaching that said bowl to the chuck once you get the outside turned. There's a lot of discussion and even argument in the turning world about what's the best way to hold a cross-grain bowl onto a chuck. Some argue that a tenon is perfectly acceptable. And yes, you can use a tenon, but there's some caution that you need to take when you're using a tenon in cross grain. Such as said, there's a tooth in these jaws here. That little tooth can actually get into the grain and cause it to split. Using jaws that have this little tooth on it, I don't recommend it. The most common methods to deal with the shearing that can occur if you're using a tenon on a cross-grain bowl is to use a recess, an expansion recess like this one, where the jaws open up and it holds that bowl. You do cut a dovetail both on the inside of the expansion recess to match that dovetail there, and on the outside of a compression tenon to match the inside shape of the chuck. There's one more method that can be used, and as a matter of fact, there are some very well-known and world-famous bowl turners who use this method because they don't like chucks at all. I do have a waste block or a glue block mounted in my chuck because I don't have a problem with chucks personally. However, most of the time this would be used with a faceplate screwed into a waste block or a glue block. And I have some double-sided tape on here because I was using it to hold smaller objects. But you can use glue to glue a bowl blank to a waste block or a glue block such as this. This is wood that you're not going to use. It's just a spare, it's a little piece of scrap. You can actually glue a bowl blank to that using CA glue. Turn the outside of your bowl, turn the base of your bowl. It will shear off with a little tap with a chisel, and you can actually reverse it and glue the other side to a glue block. And you can turn the bowl completely without actually going into the wood in cutting a tenon or a recess. And you can end up with bowls with a very nice flat bottom where people go, well, how did he hold that? How did he hold that on the lathe? That's one method to do it. That's another way you can do it. And if you don't have a chuck, a faceplate and a glue block is probably your best bet. Now you can start your bowl without any of those things if you have a drive center and a live center. Drive center goes in the headstock of the lathe. Take a Forstner bit that's about the same size, maybe a tiny bit bigger than the drive center. Drill a hole about a 1/2 inch deep or so in the center of the bowl so that you can actually get that drive center down into it, and it can't come out. It's because it's deep in it, it's 1/2 inch deep in it. It won't come out. And then hold it with your live center from the other end, and you can turn down to a tenon using this method and then reverse that and put it into a chuck. Or you can, if this is flat, turn your outside of your bowl and you have this nice flat surface, and you can reverse that and glue it onto a sacrifice block or a glue block. Those are several methods that you can use to hold a bowl on a lathe in order to turn it. The oldest method, however, is to suspend a log between two centers and using a spring lathe or a treadle lathe or a pole lathe, which is essentially a branch with some rope going down to another branch or a pedal that you step on, and that turns the lathe back and forth. You cut a bowl, an end grain bowl, into the branch, getting thinner and thinner where it's hollow, rounding out here, and you have this nice, and then ultimately you thin it out on both ends and snap off either end, and then carve with a knife the rest of the inside and the rest of the outside of the bowl. I can't use a treadle lathe because I have a very bad back, but the very most rudimentary way to build a bowl is to carve it literally out of a branch between some kind of centers on a treadle lathe. And that's not a skill set I possess because physically I'm unable to use a treadle lathe, but that also exists and is a way to make bowls without all the fancy equipment like an electrical lathe.